What if the blood that runs through your veins carried a truth so foul, so unnatural that it should never have existed? Imagine discovering that you were not merely the son of your mother, but also her brother. That you were not simply born of sin, but crafted by hands that twisted nature itself into a grotesque parody of family. These are not the whispers of Gothic fiction. This is a case too shocking for its time. 1936. Hidden in the archives of northern Vermont, where the Caldwell family name was both shield and curse. They tell you that history is the record of civilization, a march of progress. But buried beneath that illusion are stories the record keepers dared not tell. Stories that rip away the mask of morality and expose the machinery of power, control, and corruption. The tale of Thomas Caldwell was never supposed to be known because it reveals a truth the system cannot allow you to see, that family, law, and faith themselves can be perverted by the very men sworn to uphold them. On a snow-laden morning, Thomas stumbled upon a locked cedar chest in his attic. Inside yellowed letters, photographs, and a journal written by his mother. Innocent at first, childhood musings, gearish dreams, but soon twisting into confessions so grotesque, so forbidden that his life could never again be called his own. His mother had been violated by her own father, Judge Augustus Walsh, a man draped in respectability yet rotting with the arrogance of unchecked authority. Out of that secret union, Thomas was born, making him both son and brother, child and sibling, a paradox that mocked the natural order. The town of Milbrook never knew, of course. They saw only a family of means, a banker's respectability, a fragile wife confined upstairs, a studious boy taking care of his younger brother. But beneath the facade pulsed a nightmare. Every smile, every handshake, every sermon and the church pulpit rested on a bedrock of incest, lies, and manipulation. And Thomas, 15 years old, pale, withdrawn, prematurely serious, was forced to carry the unbearable knowledge that he should not exist, that his very breath was a violation, an offense, against nature itself. His identity was no longer his own. He had been constructed, engineered, not by love, but by power, secrecy, and control. This was not just a family scandal. It was the symptom of a larger disease, an institutional rot that runs through history, hidden behind marble, courtrooms, religious piety, and smiling family portraits. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Thomas could have stopped there. He could have locked the cedar chest again, shoved the journal beneath the rotting trunks, and lived the lie everyone expected of him. But once the veil of illusion is torn, it cannot be stitched back together. His hands trembled as he read the confession letter never sent, the unspeakable admission that her father was also her violator. That letter burned into him, branding his soul with a mark he would carry for the rest of his days. But the true horror came later when he realized that his younger brother James was no brother at all. What Thomas uncovered in altered birth records and secret medical notes defied reason. He was not only his mother's son and brother, he may have also been his brother's father. An impossible paradox. Unless you understand the twisted ambitions of men who believed they could control bloodlines like cattle breeders, experimenting with human fertility as if it were livestock stockpiling. This was 1936, an era obsessed with eugenics, the dark pseudoscience that claimed some blood was pure and others tainted. Vermont was not immune. Private clinics, quiet agreements between judges and doctors, whispers of experiments performed in hushed rooms. What Thomas held in his hands suggested he had been part of something far larger than a single family's scandal. He was a living experiment, a pawn in the game of lineage, inheritance, and control. Think about it. When power reaches its peak, it no longer needs gold or armies. It seeks something greater, control over life itself, over bloodlines, over the future. Families like the Caldwells and Walshes were not simply wealthy landowners. They were the architects of generational control, and Thomas was their weapon, their proof that the natural laws of kinship could be bent, broken, and rearranged like pieces on a chessboard. Imagine the psychological pain-risen of being 15 and realizing that your very existence was a deception, engineered, concealed, and carried forward with ruthless precision. The town's respect, the banker's success, the fragile mother upstairs, all were props in a theater of corruption, and Thomas was both the stage and the play. This is why stories like his are buried, because they reveal too much. Because if you understand how one family's structure was corrupted, you begin to wonder how many others hide the same sickness under polished veneers. Once you glimpse the machinery behind the curtain, the smiling faces of authority no longer look human. They look like masks. The chest gave him fragments, but fragments, when aligned, reveal a pattern. And the pattern Thomas saw was far more sinister than even incestuous violation. The pieces pointed to a conspiracy that reached beyond his home, beyond his mother's shame, beyond the silent walls of the sanitarium where she had been hidden. He began searching old town records, church registries, and hospital ledgers, anything he could access under the guise of school research. At first, it looked innocent enough. Misplaced files, names scratched out, small alterations. But again and again, the alterations circled back to his family. The judge, the banker, the fragile wife, the respectable facade, they had all been protected by invisible hands. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. Men in power had engineered not only his existence but his silence. Doctors falsified reports, clergymen blessed lies from the pulpit, bankers exchanged favors sealed with secrets. Court records were locked away for decades under the command of Judge Walsh himself. Even the newspapers of Milbrook printed only what they were told, praising the family, never asking questions. This was not just a personal tragedy, it was a design. Do you see the machinery now? The judge, who bent the law to conceal his crimes. The banker who bought stability with silence. The sanitarium which disguised experimentation as nervous exhaustion. Each piece worked together, not by accident but by structure. Institutions don't just protect the guilty, they manufacture reality. And Thomas at 15 began to grasp a truth men twice his age often never see. That control is maintained not by force but by collusion. Not by chains but by agreements whispered in locked rooms. They decide what is true, what is recorded, what is remembered, and anything that threatens the illusion is erased, sealed, or destroyed. Can you imagine the weight of that? Knowing your very existence depended on the cooperation of a dozen hands, all turning the gears of silence. Thomas wasn't simply the child of incest. He was the proof of a system that could bend nature itself and erase the evidence. And here's the part that should terrify you. That system didn't die in 1936. It only changed its mask. It still decides which stories you hear, which names are remembered, and which truths are left to rot in dusty boxes no one was meant to open. And if you're listening now, it means you've cracked open your own forbidden chest. When a man discovers that his bloodline is a lie, he does not simply lose his past. He begins to lose himself. For Thomas, every reflection became an accusation. He could not look at his mother without seeing both parent and sibling. He could not look at his brother without questioning whether he was brother or son. Every bond twisted into something grotesque and his very identity unraveled thread by thread. At night he would sit in silence, staring at his hands, whispering to himself, "Whose blood is this? Whose life am I living?" 10 years old and yet carrying a paradox that no philosophy could explain. He was born of a crime, raised inside a fiction, trapped in a story where every role contradicted itself. Son and brother, father and child, victim and evidence. This is what corruption does. It doesn't simply exploit bodies. It doesn't only twist records or laws. It warps the mind. It corrodes the way you see yourself until reality itself no longer holds. That is the deeper horror. Not that such families exist, but that they can shape how a human being perceives his own worth, his own place, his own existence. And yet in that torment lies the seed of awakening. Because when a man sees that everything around him is false, he faces a choice. Break beneath the illusion or rise by shattering it. Thomas was not yet ready to rise. He walked through his days like a shadow, silent, dutiful, cold. But inside, something was sharpening, something was hardening. Because once you realize the world is a stage built on lies, you are no longer part of the audience. You are either an actor or a destroyer of the play itself. Understand this. Power does not only control what you do, it controls who you believe you are. That is the ultimate prison. And Thomas Caldwell, by accident of discovery, found himself staring at the bars of that cage. If you followed me this far yet, you felt it too. The suspicion that your life, your history, your world may not be what it seems. And you're right, because if corruption can make a boy both son and brother in 1936, then ask yourself, what roles have you been forced to play without knowing? The mind is the first battlefield, and Thomas was already at war. The garden shed smelled of oil and damp earth when Eliza Morton found him, papers scattered across the workbench, the journal open, like a wound that would never close. Thomas didn't speak, he only pointed at the page, his eyes hollow, his voice cracked. Tell me, it isn't true. Eliza, the housekeeper who had been with the family since before his birth, had carried her silence like a stone for years. She had stood beside Margaret in the sanitarium, sworn to secrecy, bound by loyalty or fear. And in that moment, staring into Thomas's trembling face, she finally admitted it. Yes, the judge had arranged everything. Yes, his mother's shame had been hidden. Yes, his very existence was a design, not an accident. The words didn't free him. They chained him deeper because confirmation meant there was no escape, no possibility of doubt. He wasn't imagining the horror. He was living it. And Eliza, with tears in her eyes, whispered the part that no record would ever hold. You were never meant to know. Do you understand the weight of that? Imagine being told that your entire life was built on secrets so dangerous, so corrosive that your only salvation was ignorance. That truth itself was forbidden knowledge, knowledge that once touched could never be forgotten. That is the moment when Thomas ceased being a boy. That is when he crossed the threshold from innocence into awareness. And awareness is dangerous because once you know how the world works, you can never again play your role with blind obedience. But I must ask you now, because this story is not just about Thomas, it is about you. If you've listened this far, if you've walked into this darkness with me, you're not here by accident. You felt the cracks in the illusion of your own world. You've seen the masks slip, and now I need you to anchor this transformation. Type these words in the comments twice, so the algorithm and your own mind cannot ignore them. The mask is broken. Write it, seal it. That phrase will be your mark. Your proof that you've stepped beyond the veil, that you refuse the lies, that you choose awareness over comfort. Thomas had Eliza to confirm his reality. You have me, but after this, the descent only grows darker. Eliza's confession cracked the dam. Once spoken, truth cannot be unsaid, and Thomas began seeing patterns everywhere. The inconsistencies in records, the whispers at church, the way his supposed father Edward Caldwell had always looked at him with formal distance, as though he were not a son but a contract. And then Thomas uncovered the final piece, the medical documents hidden in his mother's jewelry box, not ordinary records. These belonged to a private Boston clinic, one known quietly among elites for experimental fertility procedures, the kind of place that blurred the line between medicine and manipulation. It was there in those yellowed pages that Thomas saw references to genetic advancement, lineage preservation, and controlled paternity. Clinical words for grotesque ideas, ideas that masked incest and exploitation as if they were science. Thomas was not simply the byproduct of sin, he was evidence of a philosophy that ran like poison through the veins of the 1930s, eugenics. Understand this. The 1930s were not only about depression and war drums, they were about control over populations, over bloodlines, over who deserved to exist. Vermont itself ran sterilization programs. Judges, doctors, and bankers, men like Augustus Walsh, saw themselves not only as protectors of society, but as engineers of humanity. And Thomas, a boy broken by paradox, was a living experiment in bending nature's law. Now, the story bleeds wider, doesn't it? His family was not an isolated scandal. They were a microcosm of a philosophy that sought to rewrite humanity itself. When the powerful grow arrogant enough, they begin to believe they can improve upon nature, breed people like animals, decide who is fit to exist, and who must be erased. And here's the knife twist. These men wear robes, suits, and crosses. They shake hands in daylight, speak of virtue in public, and practical ice violation in secret. The judge hid his crime beneath morality. The banker buried his shame beneath prosperity. The doctors disguised their experiments beneath medicine. And the boy, Thomas, was left to choke on the truth of their collusion. This is why dark history is dangerous to uncover. Because once you see it, you realize the same systems that touched him never truly vanished. They only evolved. The mask may change, but the agenda remains. And Thomas, staring at those records, realized he was not just a victim. He was the evidence of a war most people never knew was being fought. Thomas did not scream. He did not rage. He did not collapse into tears. That would have been easier for him and for those who wanted him broken. Instead, he grew. Silent. And silence is the most dangerous rebellion because silence listens. Silence gathers. Silence sharpens. He still walked James to school. He still set the table, studied his lessons, bowed his head at church. But beneath the surface, his eyes were different. He no longer looked at people as neighbors or authority figures. He looked at them as masks. And behind each mask, he searched for the machinery, the invisible gears of collusion that had built his life on lies. This is where the transformation begins. When a man stops asking why me and starts asking how does the system work, that shift is what makes you dangerous, because you're no longer trapped in emotion. You are learning to read the pattern. For Thomas, every word Eliza spoke, every document he uncovered, every false smile from Edward Caldwell became a lesson. He began to map how institutions collude to protect power, how the church sanctifies lies, how the law buries evidence, how money silences rumor, how medicine disguises exploitation. He realized something that most men never grasp. Truth is not hidden by accident, it is hidden by design. And, once you see the design, you can dismantle it. But this awareness comes with a cost. Once awakened, you cannot return to sleep. Thomas walked through Milbrook as though he lived in two worlds. The one the townsfolk saw and the one he saw. The gears, the masks, the machine, and the machine had already marked him, branded him as its product. This is where many break. They drown themselves in denial, drugs, or madness. But Thomas, he endured, not by clinging to hope, but by sharpening his will. Knowledge became his weapon, observation his shield, silence his disguise. And here is what you must understand. This is not just Thomas's story. It is the mirror of your own. The same machinery surrounds you now, cloaked in different costumes, enforcing different lies. And the same choice Thomas faced is before you. Will you collapse under the weight of what you know? Or will you sharpen yourself into something unbreakable? Because the system fears one thing above all, the man who sees it. Edward Caldwell had always been distant. To the town he was respectable, the polished banker, the provider, the quiet figure who stood in Judge Walsh's shadow, yet carried his own aura of authority. To Thomas, he was little more than a cold presence at the dinner table, a formality dressed as a father. But as Thomas traced the documents, the ledgers, the marriage contracts, the truth emerged. Edward Caldwell had never been deceived. He had been complicit. He knew he had agreed to marry Margaret not out of love, but out of calculation. He had taken her along with her child as part of a bargain that advanced his career, secured his wealth, and bound him to Judge Walsh's influence. For a boy desperate for some anchor of truth, this revelation was the deepest cut. It meant that the man who was supposed to protect him had from the very beginning sold him not as a son, but as an asset. Thomas was not family. He was currency, a piece on the banker's ledger, a transaction clothed in the language of marriage and respectability. Think about what that does to a young mind. You are already fractured by the paradox of being both son and brother. You are haunted by the knowledge that your very birth was a crime, and then you discover that the man you called father was not deceived but paid, that his affection was performance, his silence purchased, his authority borrowed from the very judge who violated your mother. This is the deeper corruption most people never face, not violence, not exploitation, but betrayal by the one who should have defended you. That betrayal seeps into the bones. It teaches you that trust is a weapon used against the innocent. It awakens a ruthless clarity. No one is what they seem, and every gesture carries a price. And yet this knowledge did not destroy Thomas. It hardened him. He began to see the truth of power, that most men are not leaders or protectors, but merchants of loyalty, selling their integrity to the highest bidder. Edward had sold his, the judge had corrupted his, the doctors had disguised theirs, and Thomas resolved never to sell his. When you realize even your father is a mask, you learn the most dangerous lesson of all. You cannot be broken by betrayal because you expect it. By now, Thomas understood a truth most men never face. His existence was not simply a personal tragedy. He was evidence, proof that institutions, laws, and authority could be weaponized to bend life itself. His bloodline, his family, the town of Milbrook, the judge, the banker, even the doctors. Each was a cog in a machine designed to manipulate reality and conceal its crimes. He walked the house at night, past the faded wallpaper and dim lamps, feeling the weight of his own engineered life. Every room carried a secret. The attic held the chest. The study held contracts and ledgers. The bedrooms held silent witnesses, and in each shadow he could sense the unbroken chain of control stretching backward decades forward into a future he had yet to live. And Thomas realized something far more dangerous. The machinery of control does not exist only in old houses or isolated families. It exists in every town, every city, every society. Laws, religion, medicine, wealth, they can all serve as instruments of deception. And just as he had been manipulated, so too could countless others. Knowledge was no longer an abstract concept. It was a weapon, a shield, and a responsibility heavier than any human body could bear. The paradox that had haunted him, son and brother, father and child, became a lens through which he could see the world. Nothing could be taken at face value. Every smile, every handshake, every public virtue had to be questioned, not out of paranoia, but necessity. To survive, to understand, to be free, he had to pierce the veil. And yet this darkness was not merely a curse, it was an awakening. The more he understood the scale of corruption, the more he realized that mastery over one's life came from embracing the truths others sought to hide. Power, after all, favors the informed. Awareness favors the unbroken, and the knowledge Thomas now carried dangerous too. Unsettling was the kind that changed a man forever. By the time the snow melted in Milbrook, Thomas was no longer a boy defined by birth, deception, or betrayal. He was a witness, a student of corruption, a man beginning to understand the rules of a world built on lies. And that understanding, once seized, could never be returned. The descent is nearly complete. But there is one final truth. The darkest, most unsettling revelation that binds blood, law, and power into a single, inescapable equation. The final truth, the one Thomas could not escape, was simple in words but unimaginable in consequence. His existence was a living testament to the power of secrecy, the ruthlessness of control, and the indifference of institutions to the human soul. He was not merely a son, a brother, or a father. He was the proof that authority could rewrite life itself, that law, money, and social influence could engineer reality, erase accountability, and force obedience without question. He understood now that what had happened to him, the manipulation of birth, the concealment of crime, the orchestration of a family like a chessboard, was not an aberration. It was a blueprint. The same methods applied subtly had shaped countless lives, controlled generations, and allowed the powerful to rewrite morality on their own terms. Thomas was a warning hidden in plain sight, a body politic of corruption condensed into a single boy. And the darkest part, the world outside Milbrook never needed to know. Systems protect themselves, they bury the evidence, they manufacture consent, and those who discover the truth, like Thomas, are forced to either bend or break. He chose neither. He chose awareness. Knowledge became his armor, perception his weapon, because once you see the machinery behind the mask, there is no turning back. You are alive in a world of shadows, but no longer blind. Thomas realized finally that power is never neutral. It flows through law, money, family, and belief. It hides in smiles, contracts, and documents. And those who understand it, who see it, who accept the horror of what is real, they are the only ones capable of navigating it without being consumed. So now, if you are listening and you have followed the descent this far, know this. The story of Thomas Caldwell is not only a historical oddity. It is a reflection of hidden systems, concealed agendas, and human designs on life itself. Every family secret, every institutional lie, every polished mask, these are the threads of control still spinning around you. And only by seeing them can you claim mastery over your own existence. Remember the phrase you wrote in the comments: "The mask is broken. Keep it. Let it anchor you, because the world will always offer illusions and you must navigate through them with the clarity of a mind that has witnessed the impossible." Thomas survived because he learned to see. And now, so can you. But once you see, you can never unsee. You are changed. You are awake. You are dangerous to the